Simon Rosenberg here from Hopium Chronicles. Welcome, everybody. We gather on another joyous night for our politics, the night after the presidential debate on September 10th, 2024, when Kamala Harris came out so strong and confident and intelligent and prepared and capable and smart and strategic and just kicked Donald Trump's ass. And it was really remarkable performance last night. And the thing that I sort of have been thinking about all day long is how prepared she was. I did thousands of appearances on Fox News over 2 decades. And I was on. I wasn't paid. I was just a guest and did a lot of airtime in kind of very adversarial settings. And debating, which wasn't really a debate, right? Debating Donald Trump is hard because not only is he bring all this negative, ugly stuff. I mean, this is not a debate. This is not two politicians having a debate about issues. This is managing his madness and his mania and his ugliness and making sure you don't get drawn into it, overwhelmed by it, belittled by it, or any of the other things that could happen. And to me, this was sort of the big issue last night. We knew she was going to be strong and confident and joyful and tell her story. And she did that all unbelievably well. Frankly, I think even better than many of us probably even anticipated how fluent she was in all these major issues. And for a brand new campaign, right? I mean, this is a brand new campaign. They just started a few weeks ago. So she did great. But what I think was really incredible, and the thing that is in addition, is the way they managed him, and which I was always wondering. They had to have come a theory of the case and how to manage him. And I think they did an extraordinary job managing him. And not only was it the baiting, which was very successful at various points, but it was that she spoke directly to him without responding to him, right? When I was on Fox all the time, when I was up against a guest, and usually the anchors on Fox in the old days were very neutral and you just had a discussion, I would never really respond to them because they would try to, engage you and bring you down into some crazy place. She didn't do that. She didn't take the bait not one time last night and go into crazy places. She was prepared for the arguments he was making, and she landed so many blows against him. It was just incredible. And I think that I'm really proud of her and the campaign for having worked through and practiced how to manage his madness. She did it in part, visually through the way the split screen worked, where she was showing, sort of amusement and concern as opposed to outrage and anger. I mean, just the way she managed visually through that split screen all night. She crushed him on the split screen. And she also has just generally reminded us last night that her sophistication around her media savvies at extraordinary level. I mean, just even that opening segment where she went out to shake his hand, and he kind of stumbled, right? I mean, you could see he was confused and was brilliant, putting him on the defensive right away. Hi, I'm Kamala Harris, and he kind of grunted in response, right? And I think at that moment she kind of knew she had him already, like she had already played him before the debate even started, and we all saw it. I mean, it was just brilliant in its construct, in its intent that she's going to be on offense. She's not going to let him dictate terms of the debate, and her just generally, when you look back at the last few months, she's very media savvy, and you need to be to beat him because he's media savvy. He's malevolent in his media savviness and sort of ugly in it, but she needs to be able to operate at that level to beat him. And she's been demonstrating repeatedly incredibly strong understanding, not of the word part of the game, but the visual part of the game, the TV part of the game, and the social media part of the game. And one of the things that's going to be very important about this debate is that every one of these debates they try to get two or three moments that become things that go over the internet, and where more people will see these moments than actually saw the debate. It's an important part of the strategy. They didn't have two or three moments. They had like 15 moments last night. And I literally, in proposing and putting together, Hopium today, I had to like narrow down to 4 videos. I never put up 4 videos for you guys. It's just too many to watch. But I had a huge number and I had to winnow it down, and it was hard. I mean, I didn't even put up anything on the abortion exchange, which was just devastating for him, because it was too long, right? I didn't want to put out really long videos this morning, but she delivered. If you think back about these moments, one of my favorite ones was, that he was fired by 81 million Americans, in last election. That was just, that was meaty and strong and muscular and biting. I mean, she went after him so hard. And I think that in the preparation that happened, in the days and days they prepped, their language about her and him evolved. We heard a lot of new stuff last night. And she, in working through how to manage him and spending just time dedicated to thinking about it instead of doing rallies and all the things she's been doing, the campaign got a lot better last night. They went through a process with her and them to figure out how to really talk about him in a way that makes his madness and danger and extremism and his criminality and all of that stuff, it made it more accessible to us. They figured out how to do that. And I think that the campaign today and all of us, we're stronger today than we were, and they're weaker than they were 24 hours ago. And as somebody who does this for a living and, am involved in the language evolution of our family and the way we talk about things, there was just significant new powerful stuff that we heard last night from her, that that is going to be with us for the next 2 months, right? These are new tools in our toolbox to be able to make our case, and for our politicians and for us to use in ads, and these videos will continue to show up. And I think that, I think we'll all see which videos are the videos that we're looking at in 2 months and 6 months and 12 months about the debate last night. But I think one of them was that one that I showed today, where she talked about eating, that Putin's going to eat his lunch, and just about essentially explaining to the country about what a coward and weakling he is, and how pathetic he is, that for favor he's willing to sell out the country. That section was incredible. And because we've had a very hard time taking his unusual relationship with Russia, which is now 9 years old, the fact that all the people that they're celebrating as the people he's running with are all the most pro-Russian people in the entire Republican Party. There's been some deep, incredibly dangerous penetration of Trump in the Republican Party by a hostile foreign power. And she was able to talk about that last night in ways that were accessible to people, that weren't neither pulling punches nor scary where you stop listening, right? And I thought that stuff was a significant evolution as well. And I was really impressed. And I think that as bad as last night was for Trump, and it was really bad, the commentary that's happened from, that we will continue to hear, the moments that are spreading throughout the internet as we speak, all across the country and the world, frankly, and the sense of the Republicans who now feel that their thing is really weak and they got problems. That part of what happened last night is that what I hope happens in this election is that we enter what I call a virtuous cycle, where, we're doing well, more people come our way, joy generates joy and more people, and we sort of kick in this virtuous cycle where more money comes in, we reach more voters, our campaign gets stronger and bigger, and we just keep getting bigger and bigger and stronger as we get closer to election day. They may last night have begun to enter a vicious cycle where there is doubt about the candidate, where people hold back their money, where they don't volunteer, and their thing starts to erode, right? I don't know that yet, but it's very possible, because I did a radio interview today on Canadian public broadcasting, or Canadian public radio, this morning with a Republican, and we were on for 20 minutes at 7:30 this morning, and he trashed Trump and said he wasn't going to vote for him. And I was a little surprised by that, to be honest. That my Republican counterpart, who I was ready for to be fire breathing MAGA, was like, man, my candidate was awful, and I'm not sure I'm going to vote for this piece of crap, right? And the thing is, they all feel that way. They all know. I mean, I was on CNN a couple of days ago where my Republican counterpart said, "We don't know which Donald Trump is going to show up," and I'm like, "Yeah, we do. There's only one Donald Trump now. There may have been a normal Donald Trump in 2016 and 2020. There isn't anymore. He's diminished and untethered and unwell, and he is only what we saw last night. This is what he was in the debate, the previous debate. It's what he was in the convention speech when he went off script. It's what he does in every single interview he does. He's spending far less time in the real world that we all inhabit and more time in this imaginary world where where we execute babies after birth, where the economy is bad instead of really strong, where there are Haitian immigrants eating dogs and cats in Ohio. All of these kind of unbelievably ridiculous, delusional, batshit crazy stuff that he's doing. I feel, as somebody who's watched him for all these years, that the amount of time that he's spending in Crazy Place, what Greg Sargent used to call Foxlandia, right, as opposed to the place that we all live in, is increasing, and it's pushing him further and further away from voters. And so I come out of this debate, unbelievably enthused and excited and proud of Kamala Harris. And I think we just have to also take a step back and just recognize just how extraordinary she has been. I mean, this campaign is going to go down in history. If we win this thing, and I think we will, and I'll get to that in a second, her performance and her going from being the VP and all of a sudden being the candidate in July and having to take over a campaign that was built for somebody else, unite the party, do a convention, pick a VP candidate, develop an argument and a story and an agenda about her presidency, continue to perform at like at the upper level, what's possible at Clintonian and Obama levels of performance on the stump, right? This has been incredible. I mean, Kamala Harris is going through, arguably the most remarkable political period of a major party candidate in modern American history right now. I mean, she's coming out of this kind of a giant, in the way that we saw Obama and Clinton in their performance. I mean, Joe Biden was an incredible president. He just wasn't, somebody that could rally all of us and inspire all of us in the way that, rhetorically, right? And she's playing at the upper level of the game on so many different levels, and her team is unbelievably strong. This is an amazing campaign, not just an amazing candidate. The quality of the rallies, they keep, do every kind of major event. They just knock it out of the park. And, let's just like, as fellow Democrats and proud patriots who love our country, like, let's just, big round of applause for the Harris Walz campaign itself and the people running it who've done an extraordinary job under incredible, unprecedented circumstances. And to her, I mean, at the end of the day, she's gotten it done. And it's been incredible. I mean, she had a plan last night, she executed it, she kicked his ass. And now we have a plan to go win the election, and we're going to execute it, and we're going to kick their ass, right? That's where we are. And I just like, we are witnessing the rise of one of the most potentially powerful politicians in modern American history right now in front of our eyes. And it's been incredible. I've known her for 20 years. We go way back. I'm unbelievably proud of her. But I'm also inspired by her. I'm energized by her. I'm, and impressed by, as somebody who's in the game, I'm watching an MVP player here, like have a career year and just do extraordinary things. And at a time when it really matters, right? For all of us, for our freedoms and our democracy and for our future and our kids and our grandkids, she is stepping up in a time when she was dealt a difficult hand, a great opportunity, but something that was really hard. And she's just knocking it out of the park every day. It's incredible. I'm really excited tomorrow. Remember that if you want to connect with this energy on the trail, their YouTube channel has all of their events are live that you can watch. It's better than a lot of the TV you're going to be able to see. She's got 2 events tomorrow with Anderson Clayton. Her first 2 events after the debate are going to be in North Carolina tomorrow. You can watch them on her YouTube channel, Governor Walz as well. And this is a really exciting time, and we got to take the wins when we come. This is a hard business, and we've had a remarkable run here. Just quickly about where the election is, and then I'll go to questions. Look, I wrote this the other day. We are in a place where what's remarkable about the polling data over the last few weeks is how consistent it all is. In 2022, the data was all over the place. The data wasn't all pointing in the same direction. Right now, the polling data in the states, nationally, in the Senate races is all sort of saying the same thing. They're describing the same election. And that election, there's virtually no outliers to this polling. And that election is us being ahead by 2 to 3 points in the national popular vote, us being ahead by 2 to 3 points in the congressional generic, very similar numbers, us, being in better shape in the battlegrounds, but not at 270, but closer to 270 than the Republicans. We have, incredibly strong performance in the Senate races, which will become more important as we get closer to election day in the battlegrounds. The Senate is up for grabs. I mean, this notion that Tester's behind, there's no data to show that. I just want to be clear that there have been 2 public polls taken in Montana in the last couple of months, not many. There haven't been many polls there. One has them up, one has them down. And the one that has them down was done by Trump's pollster, the AARP poll. So I'm just dismissing that out of hand. And Tester, I just talked to somebody involved in the Senate races. They view the Tester race as a toss-up. Whether or not the family's going to go in any of these other races, for those of you who've been agitating for me to get involved in the Osborne Senate race in Nebraska, we're going to look at it and we're going to sort of assess the landscape over the next week or so. But remember, we've already put almost $300,000 into Nebraska in the Hopium community. We are one of the first and largest investors in the Nebraska Democratic Party, and we've raised over $100,000 for Tony Vargas. And so we're already really heavy into Nebraska. And so we're there. Whether we're going to go beyond that into Florida, Texas, I don't think our community can do that without the party committee doing it. I can't ask you guys to give your hard-earned dollars, I think, unless the national party committee is really going to put in 25 or 50 million bucks to make these races possible. They're close. We have to keep an eye on it. If Kamala Harris, if the race changes by a couple points because of her strong performance, which is completely possible, then these races get even a little closer, right? And so we're going to keep an eye on it. I have many of you who are emailing me and messaging me all the time about the need to focus more on the Senate. And look, our strategy has been to focus on getting to 270, winning the presidential. I felt like we had a clear and hopium path in the House, and we've been busting ass in the House. And all of you need to come to our Thursday night events. They're where all the cool kids are. We have a lot of fun at these events on Thursday nights. And in the Senate, we went really hard in for Ruben Gallego, who, Sinema got out late. He needed a lot of help. We helped. We one of the largest investors in Arizona this cycle. And we'll keep looking, but I feel the Senate is very competitive, and the House, I feel, is likely to flip. And so what we're seeing now is the election that we all hoped we were going to have. And what the vice president said last night was, hard work is good work, and we can win. And we can win. And this was new language for her. And it was important because it wasn't the underdog language. It was that, now we're going to close the deal and win this thing. And I think that's where the race is. I mean, I think we have a slight advantage, but we have a very significant advantage in how we're going to close. We have more money, we have more volunteers, and we have more enthusiasm. And so it means our capacity to close out this election, because of all of you and all the work that you do, is far greater than the Star Wars bar political management of the Republican Party right now. And Trump, in his anger and frustration with the RNC, and who knows whether or not he's getting percentage cuts out of what he's doing, they've created this cockamamie, ridiculous thing where they're allowing their field operations to be distributed and disaggregated through a bunch of outside groups. Nothing like this has ever been tried before. I don't think it's going to be effective. And, we have incredible superiority on the ground. And where we're going to test that superiority is in the early vote. Because Tom Bonnier and I, in our presentation last week, talked about how in 2022, one of the reasons we were so confident that we were going to do better than everybody expected was that all these indicators of intensity pointed towards us in 2022. We did well in the special elections. We did well in the fundraising. We did well in voter reg numbers, and then we did really well in the early vote. And so all these indications of intensity and people actually voting, by the way, or giving money, things that weren't about answering a poll, but indications of engagement in politics, all pointed towards us in 2022. And we argued that, we thought we were going to do better than everybody expected, and we did. Well, those same indicators of intensity are pointing towards us again, right? We've done well in all these special elections, off-year elections, and every kind of election all across the country for the last 2.5 years. That hasn't stopped. We have been dramatically outraising the Republicans across the board, right? Particularly in hard dollars. Tom has now documented that the voter reg numbers have shifted since Kamala became the candidate and are moving in a positive direction. We have clear data showing a huge spike in enthusiasm. And now the next test of this, the Rosenberg-Bonner keys, not the Alan Lichtman keys, but our keys to this election, will be in the early vote. And the early vote begins in 9 days, the early in-person voting. And there's now 46 days of voting that comes after that, with election day being at the very end. And what I want to pitch to all of you, for those of you who've heard me talk about this, is I just want to spend a minute here to close about the importance of voting on day one. And what the theory of this is, and we saw this play out in 2022, this is more than a theory. This is something we learned from what happened in 2022, was that every night the campaigns get a list. Once voting begins, they get a list of everybody who voted, not how they voted, but that they voted. And what happens is then the campaigns take you off the GOTV list. And so, those people that vote then don't get phone calls. They don't get they don't get door knocks. They come off the rolls, right? We know you voted. We're now focusing on other people. The faster that we get through what we call prime Dems, the people that vote all the time, the quicker we can move into targeting lower propensity voters, people who vote less or are more episodic voters is another term that's used for them. And the faster we get to the episodic voters, the more likely it is that we're going to turn them into real voters by voter contact and all the things that we do. And so this becomes really important, because if large numbers of us vote on day one or vote early, then the campaigns can take the resources they have and start targeting these more episodic voters, which increases turnout and makes it more likely we win. So voting early, which is something all of you can do in your states whenever early voting begins, whether it's by mail or drop box or in person, helps us win the election. It's another step you can take to help us win and help Democrats, win this election wherever you are. And what's also voting on day one does is that it means that we have weeks of the election system working properly. And so it makes it far harder for Donald Trump let me just close the door. It makes it far harder for Donald Trump to make the argument that somehow something has been cheated or we've done something untoward or something crazy has happened, because people have seen with their own eyes, all these people voting all across the country without incident or without problem, right? And so it becomes also a way of insulating us from whatever shenanigans they're going to try to come, or it makes it much harder for them to do it. So it creates more voters and makes it harder for Republicans to cheat. And the third thing it does is, by moving more of our vote before election day, it also makes it harder for any kind of interference on election day, a bad weather event, or anything else that could happen that could disrupt voting from happening, and because more people will end up voting before election day. So it's not only a way of us winning and growing our vote, but it's also a way of creating greater integrity in our democracy itself. And this is really, really important. And so voting on day one, voting on early, I'm asking all of you to read my thing that I've written about this, cut and paste it into whatever you can. There's also some supporting graphics that I'll be sharing from allies in the next few days, and make voting on day one important to you as a proud patriot who loves your country and wants Democrats to win, that this is something you're going to do like it is like watching Lawrence O'Donnell or whatever it is, or celebrating Kamala. And it's just what the cool kids do now. Like, you want to be a good Democrat, you vote on day one. And this is really important. And I don't know if you noticed, but last night when Taylor Swift endorsed Kamala Harris, She said it's not only important to vote, to register and to vote, but it's important to vote early. She said that. And she said, I'm going to be sharing all the early voting information in every state to all of you to help make it easier for you to vote early. That was really important. That's a validation of this strategy, right? We have to, and it's why you're going to continue to hear me say and write that our goal now should be to win the election in October. And what I mean by that is if we can blow it out in the early vote, we can run up the score, and we'll have so many votes banked that the Republicans will never be able to catch us in November. That's what happened in the early vote in 2022. We blew it out in the early vote in 2022 all across the country in these battleground states, not New York and California, but in the battleground states where we did well. And by election day came, our margins were too big for them to be able to catch up. And so this becomes a way of also manifesting what I talk about all the time, which is we want to be on offense. We want to be taking it to them. And imagine what's going to happen to Donald Trump if we start having everyday information that Democrats are crushing them in the early vote all across the country. It's going to be another contributor to our virtuous cycle and to their vicious cycle. And it becomes something that they tried to do to us with the red wave in 2022, which is to make us feel like we were losing, which then demobilized our coalition, dried up our money, and made it harder for us to win. Well, they tried to do that to us through illicit means in 2022. It didn't work, but we know that this stuff really matters. And so, listen, folks, this has been a remarkable week for us, a remarkable month, a remarkable 2 months. We are more likely to win this election than they are. But the question of whether we win and the margin and everything, and whether we can create a big enough margin to make it impossible for them to manipulate the results, this is all on us, right? I mean, what Kamala Harris said a few weeks ago to me was one of the most powerful things she said in this election, which is that, Joe Biden didn't pass the baton to her. He passed it to all of us. And it's our job now. She's doing her job. We got to go do our job. And our job is to go vote early, to volunteer with everything we got, to make voter contact in a time when people really want to hear from us, to join these Thursday night phone banking and postcarding things that I'm doing at Hopium, which are really fun. You can have a great time on Thursday nights. You should be part of that. It's really fun. And you just got to go leave it all on the playing field. I mean, part of the reason I write 7 days a week now, I've gone to 7 days, I do a million events, I've done 5 events today, is I'm leaving it all on the playing field, right? I'm not just saying it, I'm doing it myself, right? And I'm doing it with all of you. And I just want to say that being in this fight with all of you, doing this work with all of you, raising all the money that we've raised, InfoWarring in the way that we do, this has been as much fun as I've ever had in all the years that I've been in this business. This has been an incredible experience. I love being in this battle with all of you. But the battle that's in front of us is the most important that any of us have ever been involved in. And we just got to go win this thing and kick his ass. We can. We're having the election we all hoped we'd have. We knew the theory of the Biden world and now the Harris world was they wanted those debates because they wanted the American people to see him. Because I think there was always a sense that we were not really, the media was not capable of conveying just the ugliness of him in 2024. And they wanted these debates. This is why they wanted the June debate. They didn't know that Biden was going to have a tough night. But their strategy about forcing the debates to happen to make it harder for him to walk away was vindicated this week by the fact, because you can't, unless you see this guy and hear him and connect with his madness and his mania and his extremism and his craziness, you can't. I think it's easy to discount it and believe that it's not true, because you don't want to believe that somebody who led our country is this batshit crazy. I mean, this is kind of a natural response. So we needed to show him to the American people last night. And people didn't like what they saw. We know this from all the polling data and everything else that happened. And so, we've now just got to go win this election together. I think we can. I think we got to work harder on this than anything we've ever worked. And let's just keep fighting together, everybody. It's been a lot of fun, but we got a lot of work to do. Okay, let me get to questions, and thank you, everybody. Let me just try to read the sense of things here. Yeah, let me Karen raised this question, and I think this is a really important question about the media began to fact check and push back on Trump for the first time ever. Is this a new trend or a one off? I can tell you from press interviews that I've done with mainstream newspapers in the last few days that, and this has predated the debate, that the question of Trump's sanity and his madness and his extremism and all this is now being looked at in a new way by reporters. This has become, and what David Muir did last night was something that was really critical, which is that when Trump went to one of these crazy places, this unbelievably ridiculous right-wing invented meme about the Haitian immigrants eating people, stealing pets from people's yards and eating them, right? Like animals in the way that Trump talks about this. David Muir pushed him, and he was rattled by it, right? And it was critical that he did that, not that Kamala. This notion that we heard from CNN that it was up to the candidate to rebut all the lies. I mean, I just want to say, look, I go on CNN a lot, and I like Jake Tapper and Dana Bash. That was just bullshit. I mean, it's not how debates work. Debates, moderators intervene in debates all the time. I mean, this notion that they absolve themselves of responsibility for spreading Trump, allowing Trump to, spend an hour and a half spreading unbelievable disinformation, was like not what news organizations should be doing. And ABC, I thought, did a really good job last night in finding this sweet spot. I thought the debate was lightly moderated, right? They let most of it was them talking about the big issues of the election, by the way. I mean, the Republicans have been bitching and moaning that Trump got asked hard questions. My God, I mean, it's the first time he's really been asked hard questions, because I think that part of Trump's thing is that he's scary and he's angry and he's like a bully. And so there's an enormous amount of self-censorship in the media where they don't raise things that are uncomfortable for him. They don't want to make him mad, and they don't want to get in trouble, and they don't want to get attacked on Twitter, right, for being tough on Trump. And there's this like police that come if you are say hard things to Donald Trump, you get a million people attacking you on Twitter, right? And so, that last night was important. I mean, because they challenged him on something that it was not a lie. I mean, I think this is really important that we find the right language about this. It was an invention. It was a non-truth. It was something that hadn't happened. I mean, there were lies he told last night. There were many, many lies. But then there are these other things he does, which is that he imagines this alternative world. And part of the reason he imagines this alternative world is because he has to invent a political party that he can beat, because he can't beat the one that's in front of him. And so this invention is actually essential to them and a sign of desperation and weakness, as opposed to something that's cute and funny and interesting and strategic. And one of the things that I talk about with Trump for all of you as we go into this next election, and I didn't say this earlier, there is this kind of reigning myth about Trump. I wrote about this the other day, that he has some kind of special superpowers, that voters come out and only vote for him and they don't vote for other people, that there's a hidden 3 to 4 points in the electorate. And he's got this special connection with white working class voters. Donald Trump got a lower percentage of the vote in 2016 and 2020 than Mitt Romney did in 2012. Donald Trump has no special powers. Donald Trump is an idiot. Donald Trump is a loser. Donald Trump is a fabulist. Donald Trump is unfit, unwell, a rapist, a fraudster, a traitor, and a felon. There is nothing magical or important about him. And this kind of Wizard of Oz myth around him is something that Kamala Harris last night did an incredible job. Instead of making him big and strong and powerful, she made him weak and pathetic and ridiculous and unserious. And we all have to do that every day. This is a psychological thing that we have to do. We have to not build him up. We have to make him small. I've been writing about this a lot over the last couple of weeks. And he doesn't, this notion that if we're ahead by 3 to 4 points, we're losing the election. I describe this as a polling Jedi mind trick, right? Hey, Democrats, you're not really winning the election. You're actually really losing the election. And, because Donald Trump has got this built-in 3 to 4 percentage points. Well, let's be clear. That was true in 2016 and 2020. It has not been true since Dobbs happened. Republicans have been underperforming public polling for the last 2.5 years. Donald Trump underperformed public polls in the primaries, not overperformed them. If there was this secret hidden Trump vote, it all went to Haley in the primary, right? It didn't actually show up for him. So in this election, there was no secret hidden Trump vote in many elections that happened. And he also, the fascists in Europe and in France also underperformed public polling. And I think it's because voters in the West are aware that this right-wing nationalist politics, which has different names in different countries, is dangerous. And their vote, when they have to go vote, like what happened in the Republican primary, people that may have thought they were going to vote for Trump voted for Nikki Haley. And because they just couldn't pull the lever. This is what happened in France and in Europe as well. The fascists were doing well in polling. And when people actually went and go vote, they couldn't pull the lever for, people that they said, I just can't do this. It's too dangerous. It's too scary. And so I think this idea, as you all go into the election, is that, Trump doesn't have superpowers. He's not some grand strategist. They're fucking up the election. He made a really bad VP pick. He's got this ridiculous ground operation, right? We're pulling, and what Kamala did last night is she pulled the curtain back from the wizard. She reminded everybody the Orange Emperor has no clothes. And we have to stop giving this guy powers that he doesn't have. The only reason he won the election in 2016 was because of an extraordinary intervention by the Russian government and by the FBI of the United States. Hillary Clinton had beaten him. He was dead. He was up. We were up by 5 points 10 days out when the Comey thing happened. That election was over. He performed terribly in the debates. And so this notion that he's some kind of like mad genius that has some secret powers, I just keep coming back. The word that comes to me the most about Trump is that he's an idiot, and that he's actually, does things that, I was on with a Republican the other day, and he said, I've never seen a candidate who does more things that make it more likely for them to lose than Donald Trump. And so just part of my admonition to all of you, my advice to you in this close, is that he's not the Wizard of Oz. He's the old man behind the curtain. He's not the king. He's the naked guy, the orange naked guy who paints his face and dyes his hair and wears a girdle and is this ridiculous, insane figure in our history. And make him small and not big in your rhetoric, in your communications, because there's this other thing that's happening, which is we all think that somehow he's going to cheat to win the election. We don't know how, but there's like various things that he's going to do. I don't know. I mean, if he can't pick a VP and if he can't run a field operation, we have to be vigilant about this, right? But I also don't think we have to do what Timothy Snyder tells us to do all the time, which is to not obey in advance, to not give the authoritarian the power that they don't actually have, to not give them powers, to not obey them before they ask, and to turn your power over to them. This is something we have to unlearn, right? This is super important in the family. And this has been a core part of what we've tried to do at Hopium. And yes, I think that same self-censorship, that intimidation, that worry and fear has dominated the press. There's no question that for the last several years, the daily basic rhythm of the national press in the United States has been to overestimate their strengths and to underestimate ours. And it's a problem. And although I believe that on some levels that dynamic may be unraveling right now because reporters have had to actually watch him, and it's scary and ugly. And they know this guy is not the same guy that they covered in 2016 and 2020. The dirty secret is not a secret anymore. And so I do think there's an opportunity. There's blood in the water, I think, with reporters, and they feel weakness with him. And I think the coverage may begin to change. We'll see. I mean, I may be being deeply Pollyannish here about this. Kamala Harris has said, this has come up now in several questions, that she would like a second debate with him. I don't know that it's going to happen. He's kind of threw cold water on it today. I think it goes back to this consistent theory that they have, that the more that people see him, the more likely it is that we'll win. I think that theory has been, vindicated, even if it didn't work in the first debate. It certainly worked in the second debate. I think there's no question in the research of the campaign, they realized that a lot of Americans had forgot about how wild and crazy he was and how chaotic his administration was, that somehow history had kind of, and I go back, this is my new theory about why that happened, by the way. It isn't that people believe things were good under him, is that I do think that American people are good people and that we want to think well of our leaders. and that Donald Trump was the president of the United States. And I don't think that people want to believe that we elected a bad guy, and because we don't have in the popular mythology of the United States, we don't have an historical figure because we've been so well governed for so long that we don't have somebody like Donald Trump in our past that we can point to and say, this guy is like Mussolini, or he's like this person in our history. And so I think Americans are sort of softening him out of kind of a very innocent process, right? Not a malevolent process and not a manipulated process, but out of, and I talked about this today. My three kids who are 18 or 19, 22, and 24, when they were in high school here in DC, and my wife who works in the administration, and we would sometimes at dinner, we didn't talk that politics that much at dinner. We tried to not make it a deeply political household. But when we would rag on Trump, sometimes my kids would defend Trump. And in part because for them, he was their president. And they wanted to think good of their country they were growing up in, And so I think the normalization of Trump that's happened, the minimization, has been in part based on something like deeply innocent and deeply American, which is that we believe that our leaders are good and that we've been very well governed, and that when we get someone who's not, it's a normalcy bias in essence, right? That happens, which is why the campaign felt so compelled to pull those early debates, is that they needed help to explain who he was now. And the most powerful way they could do that was to do what happened last night, which is let him talk, to bait him, to watch him lose control on the crowd size stuff and a lot of other places. His answers on abortion were just unbelievably crazy. And, he went into crazy places virtually every time he spoke. And so their strategy about the debates were vindicated. So they've come out and said they want one more. I don't think it's going to happen, but Trump may agree to it because he's in trouble and they have to change the fundamental trajectory of this race now. And I don't know how they're going to do it. They can't do it through the way you usually do it, which is barnstorming the country, because the problem they have is him. So more of him is not good. And so what are they going to do? I don't know. We're going to find out. It's going to be interesting. So let me just look at, so we don't talk about Nate Silver here. Nate Silver, we use 538. 538 is our in-house place, the place that Nate used to run until he lost control of 538 because of him allowing all this bad red wave Republican polling to get washed through 538 and mislead people about the election in 2022. My advice to you is I would ignore him completely. And I don't think he's not in the forecasting business anymore. He's in some other business. He has a book that he's trying to sell, so he's trying to make a lot of noise. I would just stick to my work, to Tom Bonier, to 538, which is I'm using as sort of an objective source. The people that run 538 right now, I think, are doing a good job, and so I just think in general, my advice to you about Nate Silver is the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. I would just completely ignore him, is my general advice to you, because I don't think he is an honest, straight up actor in the game here. And there are a lot of legitimate concerns that he's betting on the elections and that he's doing things to manipulate to make himself money. And we don't know that. We won't have a way of knowing that, but I think that's a reasonable assumption based on his behavior and recently. And so let me just keep looking here. So Madeline asked, what are the Thursday night groups? Every Thursday night, we postcard and make phone calls from 7:30 to 9 Eastern time for our targeted House candidates. We've been having 500, 600 people come to them. Go to the site. You can find it. Go to the Hopium site, sign up, come check out one. You can make phone calls or a postcard, or even just get trained on how to do postcards or phone banking, right? We almost always hear from the candidate that we're working for at the very beginning. And then at the end, I give sort of like a 10-minute overview of national politics. So you get 10 minutes more of Simon, which after tonight you may not need, but and you get to hear from the candidate doing an update on their race. It's been a lot of fun. I'm really grateful for the partners in this, Markers for Democracy, Postcards for Virginia, Democratic Grassroots HQ, the DCCC. We've been doing a lot of good on Thursday nights. It's a lot of fun. Come hang out with us. Um, yeah, I mean, Julia just pointed out that if you don't mind adding that towards voting early, it makes it easier for those who work in elections in various capacities. The votes come in early, and I that's a great point, and I think it was implied in what I was saying, but I'll be a little bit more make it clear that when I talk about how it's an affirmation of our democracy working, what I mean is, yes, you're correct, and I should add that it's easier for vote counters to count votes over time or to manage the process of voting over time than this huge crush of one day, right? And so it does make the system just work better. And it also allows us, I always leave this out, for those of you who understand how ballot curing works, the earlier that people vote, um, the the earlier that people vote, um, if they have a problem with their ballot, you have time to cure it. You have time to fix it in those states where that's allowed. Where if you've made a mistake and the ballot gets kicked back, you then have time to go fix it, which is a way that we pick up votes every cycle because people make mistakes on their ballots. It's part of the game, right? It's part of what happens. The So Molly asked a couple questions that I'm gonna for the rest of the election season, is it more important to turn out undecided swing voters or is it more fruitful to rally the base? And then she also asked, what's the role of the non-Trump Republicans? Listen, the way I think about politics is that we have a coalition. And I think that sometimes these concepts of swing and base sometimes distort the reality of how this stuff all works, right? Because an overwhelming number, between 75 and 90% of the people that vote for our candidates are Democrats in every election. And so within, the way that we have, I think rather than swing and base, I prefer to use the term coalition because it reflects the diversity of what we have to do. And that I think swing and base is just, it's too simple in many ways. And that we need everyone in our coalition voting as much as possible. I mean, that's this basically the reality. What's happened with this new remote texting and phone banking and this revolution in postcarding is that historically, with the limited resources we had in Democratic campaigns, all of our public communications went to swing voters, and there wasn't really a lot that we did for base voters, for prime voters, for traditional voters. We were an election day party, and we kind of did this final GOTV push in the final weekend. But we now have the ability, through the postcarding and the phone banking and the canvassing and the increased volunteers, to push the turnout up of Democrats, of people who are in that propensity range. And in the voter file, all of you have a score on what is the likelihood that you're going to vote. And and so what happens is the GOTV starts by hitting the people who are most likely, and then they move their way down the list. And so that can be true of various parts of our coalition based on the individual voting habits of an individual voter. So the way I prefer to talk about this is that every candidate needs to build a coalition that will help them win. And lumping groups into swing and base, I feel, is too simplistic. It's more complicated than that in many ways. And particularly given the diversity of many of our districts and states that we have to operate in. And one of the members of that coalition that is new for us are these former Republicans or Republicans who are temporarily with us. They're super important. They matter so much. I talk and write about this all the time. I actually helped the then Biden campaign, build their Republicans for Biden operation in the early days. Because what is happening with Liz Cheney and these other Republicans like Adam Kinzinger, and I've been writing about him a lot over the last couple of weeks, is they're giving permission, what we call in the business permission structure. They're creating a permission structure for Republicans to not vote for Trump, and what Liz Cheney is doing very explicitly is that it's not good enough not to vote for Trump and write in somebody. You must vote for Kamala Harris. And even her dad, and the idea that we're all on the same team with Dick Cheney these days is kind of an extraordinary thing, but we are. Even her dad said, we need to vote for Kamala Harris. It's not good enough not to vote for Trump. This is a big deal. I mean, if the Haley vote in the primaries was 20% of the Republican electorate and 5% of the overall electorate, we're talking about a large number of people and what could be a very close election. And I think that I just did a press interview about this earlier tonight, that, I mean, one of the most interesting things we have to think about, right? And Stuart Stevens said this in one of the shows that I was on in the last few days, and on my Closing Strong series with Tara McGowan, we've got a great interview with Stuart coming out tomorrow, and where he reflects on the Republican Party and what's happened to the Republican Party. And Stewart ran Mitt Romney's race and ran one of Bush's. He was a senior guy in Bush, Romney, and the old Republican Party. He was one of the top strategists and guys in that era, and he's now with us. I think for a lot of these people, what Adam Kinzinger said in his remarks, and I would encourage all of you to go back and watch those 7 minutes, because to me it was some of the most powerful moments in the convention. He said something that was really moving to me and important to me, which is, said, listen, I've been hanging out with these Democrats, and I'm paraphrasing, and they're just as patriotic as we are. They love this country as much as we do. The idea that somebody who is a movement conservative congressman would get up at a Democratic convention and say that is extraordinary. And I don't know what's going to happen after this election. I mean, imagine if it's all MAGA people still running the Republican Party if we win. And what happens with Liz Cheney and Mitt Romney and all these folks, and the hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people in the states that are also have broken from their MAGA-led parties? Do they start becoming Democrats? I mean, I think Stuart Stevens is a Democrat now. I don't think he's a former Republican. I don't think he's playing with us and dancing with us and going to go back to his old team, because I don't think they think the old team's ever going to come back. So I don't know where we are on this. I mean, we had a major party realignment 60 years ago in the 1960s, when, after the civil rights movement and the voting rights movement, one of the most tragic things in American history happened, which is the Republican Party responded to that. Democrats now becoming, after having been the party of the South and the party of slavery and so on, when we became the party of racial reconciliation and celebrating the American rainbow, the Republican Party had a choice to make at that point, right? They could have continued along their historic path as being the party of racial reconciliation and diversity, which is the founding value of the modern Republican Party, of the Republican Party. And imagine if they had made that choice to work with us to move the country ahead forward on race in the 1960s. They chose another path. They chose the Southern strategy. The Southern strategy was to strip away all the Southern states from us and flip the Electoral College map that had been the South had been, the solid South had been our base as a party. And the two parties basically inverted in the 1960s. And I say tragic because that party, the Republican Party, once their Cold War anti-Russia stuff disappeared after the Cold War ended, all that was left was Willie Horton and exploitation of racial fear. And one of the reasons that it's my belief, and I've written about this extensively, is that the Republican Party has descended into what it's become, is that once it lost the mooring of the Cold War, where we were fighting for democracy and freedom, it has slowly drifted into becoming this fascist anti-democratic party, because it's the natural extension of a race-based, sort of racial exploitation of racial fear politics. Long answer to this question is that I don't know what's going to happen with the two parties. Are we in now some kind of new realignment where people like Stuart Stevens and Liz Cheney are now Democrats and not former Republicans, or not? Because what happens if they don't have a party to go to? And what happens if the capture of the Republican Party, not by conservatives, but by, right-wing fascistic nationalists, continues for another 5 to 10 years? Stewart said something that was very interesting, which he said, I don't see MAGA getting flushed out of my old party for a while. So we're in this dance that we're doing with more traditional Republicans, and the welcoming that we're all giving to them, creating a seat at our table for them in this fight to preserve our democracy, is something that's very powerful and important. Because political science will tell you that when somebody votes a certain way 3 times, they then become that, they're then tied to that ideology or that party. Well, we are going to have now former Republicans now voting in for Democrats over more than 3 elections potentially. And I don't really know what happens at that point. I don't know that there's going to be a snapback where Liz Cheney runs for party chair, becomes the party chair, and all of a sudden, all the MAGA people disappear, and there isn't kind of these rear guard fights where Matt Gaetz isn't causing trouble. I don't know what happens. A lot of it will depend on what happens with Fox News, I think, because I think Fox News essentially is the party now. The RNC is this appendage of Fox News to some degree. And I think it will depend a lot about what happens inside of Fox News. The Fox News with Sean Hannity at the front is not going to be a party that Liz Cheney can lead. And so, this is going to be fast. And so what I want to conclude with in this is that this issue of our welcoming in former Republicans and the unprecedented alliance that has been established, which is something that I wrote about in the second day that Hopium was founded in March of 2023, is something that I think is far bigger and more important than we really understand. And we have to make these former Republicans or temporary allies of ours feel very welcome in our family. And I think the Harris campaign has done a phenomenal job at this. I mean, Liz Cheney is not just supporting Kamala Harris. She made her announcement in North Carolina. She was going on TV and just beating the living crap out of Trump in a way that she's probably more effective at attacking Trump than virtually anybody in the country. This stuff matters. And so it's exciting. It's expanding our coalition. Go back and read my Get to 55 memo, where I talk about how we want this to be a cycle of growth, expansion, demographically, geographically, because of their extremism, more was possible for us. And what's played out over the last year and a half is a lot of what I hoped for when I founded Hopium in the early part of 2023, that we would be growing and expanding and taking stuff away from them and punishing them for their extremism. One example of that is in Florida, right? We are ahead. I mean, the ballot initiative, the abortion ballot initiative, has a serious possibility of passing in Florida. If that happens, it will be a devastating blow to the MAGA forces, the MAGA aligned forces in Florida. It will be a clear repudiation of their extremism by the people of Florida. And it's critical that these things happen. And so let me just conclude here by saying, first of all, thank you all. We're doing a lot of good. We're having a lot of fun. This has been a great community that we've built together. Come continue to give money and participate in the things that we're doing. Help me to continue to grow Hopium, right? Either through paid subscribers or just your friends. The more the merrier. We're up to 110,000 people now. It's hard to believe in our community. Let's just go leave it all on the playing field together. I mean, we can win this election, and a lot of it will depend on how hard we work, and how hard we work now, not in late October and